Hey guys, welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. Today we are talking about the dudes. I'm actually going to share a little study update. Every Sunday, I get inundated, and my poor assistant who manages my inbox, she's the one that actually has to filter through the plethora of emails if I don't get to them first. I get just inundated with all of the research that I can possibly get my hands on for fertility, for hormones, for PCOS, for supplements, for all of the things that might potentially help you guys, my clients, myself, and my team do better and provide better care. So a couple weeks ago, I had this study come across my desk that made me go, oh my gosh, thank goodness, this is exactly what I need. So short little story before we get into the study. The last few months, we've been talking a lot inside the Fertility Confidence Method community about getting our male partners on board with nutrition and lifestyle changes, and even adding supplements into the routine, getting them on board with testing, and helping our clients really understand the difference between optimal and normal, not just for blood work, but when we're actually looking at a semen analysis as well. And one conversation that we kept having to have was, just because you have a good, moderately okay, or optimal semen analysis, it doesn't actually excuse our male partners from preconception care. And for a lot of men, that was a big kind of like punch in the gut of like, well, why? I've been given the green check mark. I was told that everything's fine. It's not my problem. It's not my fault. I can continue, life as usual. And there's two big reasons why we typically have a conversation about this, even after you've been told by your fertility clinic, your OBGYN, your general practitioner that your semen analysis looks good. First, looks good is very different from looks optimal. And if you don't know what I mean by that, you have to go back a couple episodes and check out, I don't know what number it is off the top of my head, but it's called Evaluating Your Partner's Semen Analysis, or Understanding the Numbers of Your Partner's Semen Analysis. That will actually go deeper into the breakdown of what I mean by optimal versus normal. So that's number one. Even if you've been told by your clinic that your sperm looks good, for us and for generally having a increased statistical chance of conceiving each cycle, good isn't always good enough. Okay. The second piece is, and this is where this conversation is going, is that it goes beyond a semen analysis. Okay. We don't actually get every piece of information and all the Sorry, I'm recording this in a video, so if you're listening on the podcast, you can't see me, but I thought I found all this sauce on my sweater. It was just my hair. So we're all good. Don't stress. My shirt is clean. So a semen analysis is not all the answers, okay? Just because your count and your motility and even your morphology is good, it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't still something going on or issues with your sperm. Or I don't even love saying issues, but we love to come at it from an angle of room for improvement. Where is there room for improvement? And this is a really big missing factor. And so when this study came across my desk, I was like, this is it. This is the exact explanation I need to stand in this truth that we have to sometimes look beyond a semen analysis and still contribute to prenatal care as men and sperm people, because we might not know the whole picture. So this is a 2023 study. It's super brand new. It's called Lifestyle, Environmental, and Additional Health Factors Associated with an Increased Sperm DNA Fragmentation. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis. It actually looks at a wide range of studies. So DNA fragmentation is kind of like that other test that you might have had done if you're deep in your fertility clinic experience, or if you've had failed transfers or failed embryo fertilization through IVF. This is usually when that will come about. Typically, we don't see a lot of DNA fragmentation testing coming pre-IVF, which truthfully doesn't bother me a whole heck of a lot, because oftentimes we should be doing what would be considered treatment, but it's a matter of degree. Do we need to go a little bit more heavy-handed? Do we not? So that's a very personalized decision around whether or not we should be paying and advocating for this testing. But we know with high levels of DNA fragmentation. So what I mean by that is basically the integrity of the DNA of the sperm is broken. It's not that there's not enough sperm. It's not that they don't swim well. It's actually the DNA components of the sperm are fragmented. And what we see in the literature is that a higher level of DNA fragmentation actually has a lower chance of natural conception, a lower chance of conception with ART, so with reproductive technology, IUI or IVF, and an increased risk of miscarriage. So knowing those things, immediately a light bulb should be going off as to why we're not digging deeper or having this conversation a little bit more. The one thing I really loved about this study specifically is it focused on lifestyle pieces. And there's actually, let me scroll, I'm looking at it right now, but let me scroll down. There's a really beautiful line. I'll never be able to find it now. There's a really beautiful line in this study that honestly made my naturopathic heart sing, because it basically said something along the lines of, is that it? Identifying potentially modifiable risk factors for high sperm DNA fragmentation may ultimately lead to more satisfactory and cost-effective approaches to optimizing fertility, such as lifestyle modifications. How cool is that? We're actually looking at research to reduce the financial burden and prove that there's lifestyle modifications that we can make to reduce risk factors of DNA sperm fragmentation that may be lowering your chances of conceiving on your own, unmedicated, lowering your chances of your IVF cycle working, and potentially increasing your risk of miscarriage. So this study looked, and I'll actually link this paper in the show notes and in the YouTube description for you if you're curious, if you want to dig through it. Because I'm not going to go through every single piece that they looked at. I just wanted to point out the big things that they found were statistically significant when it comes to DNA fragmentation. Because it's a really full circle moment, I feel, especially if you're an FCM client listening, or if you've been hanging out in the podcast space with me for a while, you'll know that these are things that we've been talking about over and over and over again. And we're just getting more confirmation that they are important pieces of the puzzle, not just for women, but also for sperm as well. So they looked at a wide variety of infections and even cancers and tumors and different malignancies, which I thought was really interesting. So, screening for something like chlamydia, they did find that men who had a previous chlamydia diagnosis had a higher risk of sperm DNA fragmentation. So you didn't necessarily have to have active chlamydia infection, but knowing that history, then we can say, maybe we need to actually consider this. There's a whole, I'm not going to get into the whole oncology piece of the fertility realm. There's a whole, that's a whole nother conversation for another time. But one of the big things that they did find from a lifestyle piece that increased sperm DNA fragmentation was glucose and glucose management. So high blood sugar. Which then we can correlate to basically saying insulin resistance potentially as well. But when we're having poor glucose tolerance, so we're not actually utilizing our blood sugar appropriately. The study found that weight, so not necessarily weight, but BMI specifically, wasn't statistically significant, but that the blood sugar regulation piece was important. We talk about this with women so incredibly much, that blood glucose and proper glucose management for egg quality, for inflammation, for proper hormone balance is so incredibly important. Now we're seeing it. We know that having elevated blood sugar can impact sperm motility and morphology, and having something like diabetes can impact those numbers that we see in a semen analysis. But now we're actually getting confirmation that those numbers might be impacting sperm at the DNA level, meaning the integrity of the DNA is not optimal, meaning you can have enough of them, but they're actually not great. And we're not getting to see that in a standard semen analysis. So screening our male partners and having actual proper assessments with your practitioners, with your husband, with your partner, with whoever it is so incredibly important. When we're talking about glucose regulation, this is where the conversation of nutrition and lifestyle really shines. It's not about getting you on, a diabetes medication or metformin. It's about helping you understand how to fuel your body appropriately. It's not necessarily about being 100% sugar-free, but how do we get into that healthy range of glucose management while still enjoying life? So glucose becomes a really big topic of conversation now when we're talking about sperm. And we know if you've come to our egg quality workshop or you've done boot camp with us, you'll know that this is a really big piece when we're talking about female factor fertility too, which is really important. That was the first one. The second one was varicoceles. So whenever we work with clients where they've had, decreased count or really poor motility and morphology, the first thing we usually ask them to do is to go and have a urologist appointment and have a full workup, physical exam, do an ultrasound, and check if there's any varicoceles, which is essentially is just like vein dilation in the scrotum, and it can impact the way that the fluids move through the body. What we know from the research is that surgery to reverse a varicocele is fairly effective. I think it's somewhere in the realm of like 70 to 75% of men actually see an increase in their numbers after surgery, which is great. But what we're also now seeing is that might not be the whole story. That having a varicocele may actually worsen DNA integrity of the sperm, and fixing that varicocele, yes, over time will help eventually, but there's still more work to be done to essentially help with that. So I thought that one was very interesting. The last one that I also think should come at no surprise is smoking. So they found a correlation between smokers and higher DNA fragmentation. They did find dose dependency. So men who smoked more, it was worse. Men who didn't smoke all that much, it wasn't as bad. But regardless, tobacco, nicotine, they didn't actually look at cannabis. They only looked at nicotine smokers. So I think that would be an interesting piece to dig a little bit deeper into, as we know that there might be some impact there, but the research is a little bit gray. So that's another piece to consider. So when we're talking about, like general male preconception health, I think it goes without saying that we would ultimately tell men, like, you should probably quit smoking, you should probably reduce drinking, you should definitely move your body more, exercise, make sure you're getting a good amount of sleep, and eat a well-rounded whole foods nutritious diet that focuses on blood sugar regulation. Those, in my head, feel like very basic, very simplistic concepts that we should all just be like, this is what we should do to prepare our body. And as women, we probably do, right? But as men, they don't really have that same like, let's get in tip-top shape, it's baby making time. Not all men, let's not generalize here, okay? Some men out there listening might be like, I did all of those things well before we started to get pregnant, and like, kudos to you, I'm sending you virtual hugs. But the reality is that sometimes we still have those partners that are just very resistant because they don't feel the need to improve on something if it's potentially maybe not a problem. But our reality is with fertility is that 30% of infertility is male factor driven. Another 30% is both male and female factor driven, meaning 60% of infertility cases, which are on the rise, are male factor driven. I'm sure we've all seen the scary statistics out there right now that are basically saying all men are going to be sterile by like 2045 or whatever. Like, it's actually not that far away. That's how quickly we're watching our sperm decline in health. If we can improve our chances of conceiving unmedicated, improve our chances of conceiving with reproductive technology, decrease our risk of miscarriage just by changing some lifestyle factors, regardless if our semen analysis got a green check mark or not, would you not do that? That's the question you need to ask yourself is this worth it? And I feel very confident that if you are trying to build a family, it's worth it. If you are in the fertility clinic financially invested in building your family and you haven't made any lifestyle nutrition changes, oh my goodness, you've gone way backwards. These things need to be top priority, regardless of where you are. Okay, before we sign off, I want to talk about the alcohol one because I was actually really surprised that their study didn't actually find statistical significance with alcohol. We know that alcohol increases inflammation and reactive oxygen species, which then we can assume impacts DNA fragmentation, but the study did not find that. Maybe we'll see different opinions coming out with different studies, but I thought that was really interesting. We do know from the research with IVF that men who drink more than 4 drinks per week have a lower pregnancy rate with IVF and higher miscarriage rate. So we do see there's some correlation with alcohol, but this study is showing that maybe that's not a DNA fragmentation issue. The tricky part here, and the study actually says this at the end, is like, we really don't know actually what a good level of DNA fragmentation is. Unfortunately, we don't have like a good optimal level. We ideally want it to be below 25%, but should it be lower? We don't know. The clinics typically have a cutoff of 50%, so they actually won't do IVF if DNA fragmentation is over 50%. So we definitely want it below 50, but how low is actually optimal? We're not sure. We haven't done, I say we, but this is not something that I am doing. There's not a lot of studies on this. There's actually not a lot of understanding of like, are we even testing it in the best way? So my hope is that we'll actually see more coming out about DNA fragmentation. Is it important? Is it actually maybe not as important? I think this 2023 study is kind of the first step to say like, this is probably important. It's likely impactful. I would argue that couples who've been diagnosed with unexplained infertility, something like this is potentially incredibly impactful because we're not getting assessments on DNA fragmentation with our standard run-of-the-mill male fertility workup, meaning it's potentially being missed. And so if the first line of defense when we're talking about DNA fragmentation is lifestyle changes, let's do that first. And then the second piece is antioxidant support. So this is again where the research is a little gray. We have some positives and some, no benefit seen with antioxidant support, but knowing what we know about DNA fragmentation and reactive oxygen species, my hope is also that we will start to see a little bit more research done in this area with hopefully positive outcomes. And for now, we have to take what we have and make some clinical decisions based on the information that's in front of us. Another piece that I'm hoping we'll really start to see some research come out around is actually more about red light therapy and specifically DNA fragmentation. We have some studies on red light therapy with improving count and motility and morphology, which is amazing. But knowing what we know about how red light therapy works on the mitochondrial level, would we then potentially be able to assume and maybe in the study see a change in DNA fragmentation? And then what is the dose of that? How long do we need to be doing that in order to see those results? This is the research that I would love to see come down the pipeline in the next couple of years, because I think we need to start thinking outside of the box a little bit more for our couples who have recurrent loss, for our couples who have unexplained infertility, for our couples who are having repeated failed ART. These are the people that really need us to actually dig a little bit deeper into the research and a little bit deeper into areas that aren't being explored or talked about, because that's where the answers for these couples lie. So I was so happy to see this study. I think it's going to be really helpful with some of our clients to just get their partners on board a little bit more with the lifestyle pieces, knowing that your fertility isn't just your semen analysis. There's so much more to it than that. And granted, quitting smoking, not an easy lifestyle change, but if we have the data to support the improvement in fertility, that's going to make it that much easier. Now, before we pop off here, because I always just want to be really thorough, the one thing I will say is that the study wasn't looking at clinical pregnancy outcome, which is something we always want to be looking at when we're talking about the fertility research. Meaning, I can't sit here and say, if you follow XYZ recommendation from this paper, there's going to be more babies made, because that's not the outcome that the study looked at. It was simply looking at what of these risk factors had higher potential of DNA fragmentation. Now we need people to go back and study the treatments in relation to DNA fragmentation and in relation to actually making babies. Because it's one thing to improve your DNA frag, but the reality is we want the baby, right? So we want to be doing things that are actually helping improve clinical pregnancy rates. This is why it's incredibly important to work with a practitioner that understands the research and the literature and how to interpret it and how to actually use that in a clinical setting to build you out a custom plan that aligns with what your body, your specific body, actually needs to increase your chances of conceiving. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you're not listening with your partner, I highly encourage coming back and listening again with them so that they can get a good understanding. If you have any questions, as always, come shoot me a DM over on Instagram at Fertility Confidence Method, and I'll see you guys in the next one.